Hello, James here from the Crafty Pint, and as of today, from the Full Measure as well. I'm here with Luke McCarthy, my partner in crime, co-conspirator with the Full Measure.
Yeah, hello, mate. Pleasure to be with you. It's going to be great.
Yeah, for sure. And apologies in advance. This we have a little bit of an inception moment here because this is kind of an introduction to a main podcast coming up in a few minutes, which is kind of the introduction to the Full Measure, but hopefully it all makes sense. So what's coming up after the break is myself and Will, my right-hand man at the Crafty Pint. We sat down with you, Luke, in this same room in different positions a week or two ago and had a bit of a chat about your, I guess, career in spirits, bartending as well as writing, and also a bit of a chat about how the Full Measure came about and what we're intending to do with the site. If you were to try and, summarise the intentions of the Full Measure in, 20 seconds, or less, what would it be, Luke?
Yeah, well, the Full Measure exists to tell the stories of the Australian spirits industry. We want to get around to as many different producers as possible, share their stories, taste their spirits, tell everyone about it, and hopefully become a bit of a hub and a resource for anyone who might be interested in Australian spirits moving forward.
And get people excited.
That's right.
To support their local businesses, their local distillers. So we won't go into too much detail now because that's the whole purpose of the main chat coming up later. But now that the website is live, which it wasn't, when we last chatted,
right.
we probably look a bit more exhausted now because the 2 or 3 weeks since we did that thing has just been relentless getting everything ready. What I'd like to say is that when you jump online, you'll see you get a very clear idea of what we're doing with the Full Measure, but it's not complete. There are certain things we'll be adding over time. We wanted to get something out there initially now, so there are news features, there's tastings, there's some listings on there. We'll be adding bars and bottle shops over time. There'll be an industry section coming, but we wanted to get something out there so people have a clear idea what we're doing, and then it will just expand, not sort of infinitely, but expand to where it needs to get over time. But also just wanted to shout out to the businesses that have already jumped on board to support what we're doing. Obviously, we started these conversations with businesses maybe, a couple of months before we launched, but at the same time, we were sort of, I guess, bit of faith. We were asking for people like, hey, yes, I've done the Crafty Pint for 16 years. And yes, Luke is a font of all knowledge on spirits and, a man of integrity. But, we've still not done anything yet. And yet we've had a bunch of businesses jump on board, which has been very reassuring. And I think I did pinch myself a couple of weeks ago and I was like, hang on, we're like joint media partners with the Crafty Pint for 2 major industry events, and we don't exist yet. So yeah, thanks. Big shout out to Stu and the team at Voyager for bringing us on board for Grain Stock in October.
Cannot wait. It's going to be fantastic.
Well, it was amazing last year, and the CIBD Asia Pacific Convention in Brisbane in March. So that was cool. But they're not the only people that jumped on board. Right. It's been amazing. So when you do jump on the website, you'll find a whole bunch of distillery listings already there. There's a few more who have signed up and sent all the information that might not be there on the Tuesday when we go live because, we're doing our bloody best. But I wanted to thank them all in person. Nil Desperandum and Sunshine and Sons, the sort of twin operation up on the Sunshine Coast, who are also backing a new campaign, which the details we'll be sharing very soon.
Thank you, guys.
Bellarine Distillery, they grabbed Luke on the way out of the Australian Distillers Association conference earlier in the year going, we want to be the first people to sign up. So thanks to Craig and Nikki and Russ down there. Florio Distillery in SA, the Gospel Whiskey, Blue Sky Drinks.
Yeah, Starwood Whiskey here in Melbourne, Sullivan's Cove in Tassie, one of the big ones. Fantastic to have them with us. Furno Distillery, Bass and Flinders Distillery, Anther Spirits, Tin Shed Distilling Co., Hunter Island down in Tassie as well. Fantastic producers of pot still whiskey, so fantastic to have them all with us. Thank you.
We got Hang Ten Distilling on the northern beaches of Sydney. Awesome place sharing a space with Half Pace Brewing. The Sensory Agency, Backwards Distilling. Thank you so much to Liam Brief jumping on board. Naturi Vermouth, Whippersnapper. You were out visiting Jimmy and the team in Perth just recently.
Yes, awesome spot. Amazing grain and American style whiskies. Get around them. We've also got Papa Salt Gin as well. Fantastic. Tano Spirits here in Melbourne. Grandad Jack's up on the Goldie. Lark Distillery as well, which is fantastic.
The drop in tone
of
to
course.
Acknowledge,
It's just solemn ground. So amazing. I was down there recently a few weeks ago with Chris, Stu and the team, and I've got some amazing stories to tell about Lark moving forward. It's very exciting where they're going. We also have Bakery Hill Distillery. Shout out to Andrew and Dave here in Melbourne, and finally St Agnes Distillery as well.
Yeah. The people who you literally can say you wrote the book.
Yeah, I guess so. Yes, the Centenary publication. They turned 100 last year. I was very lucky to get the nod to write their story. So, what an incredible lineup to start with, and obviously plenty more to cover moving forward.
Yeah, no, thank you so much to everyone that jumped on board for launch. We know that there's a lot more conversations going on board. If you do look at what we've got live so far, have a listen to the podcast and think, yes, I want to be part of this, want to support this, because I guess the more support we get, the more support we can give to the industry, the more that we can do, the more stories we can tell, the more people we can excite, and hopefully the more spirits we can sell. At the end of the day, becomes that money go around. If you are interested, the best thing to do is to send an email to Craig Williams, craig@thefullmeasure.com.au, and he would love to hear from you. But aside from that, Luke, best of luck with what lies ahead.
Thank you. Good luck to you too. I think we're going to need it.
Hopefully we'll get some sleep at some point. But join us after the break when it will be us two again sat in different seats in this room with Will, and for a lot more on the story of the Full Measure and why the story of Australian spirits matters so much.
Yeah, fantastic.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Returning this October, Grainstock is a truly unique conference created for the brewing, distilling and baking industries, and you're invited to be part of the experience. Held at the stunning Whitten Malthouse in the Riverina, attendees will be able to take part in grainfield tours, a technical symposium, trade show, live demonstrations and sensory tastings, networking with growers, maltsters, brewers, distillers, bakers and industry suppliers from across Australia and beyond. Even better, if you're a brewer or distiller and able to supply beer or spirits to be featured at the event, you'll be eligible for a complimentary all-access conference pass and return bus transport from selected capital cities. Check it all out at grainstock.com.au and hit the Fields and Ferment tab for details on the industry conference.
Luke, here we are, launching the Full Measure on the Crafty Pint podcast. It's also going to be the Full Measure podcast, this weird hybrid thing we've spent a long time creating. All of us have spent a very long time making. Before we get into what we're doing here, we'll be playing this on the Crafty Pint podcast, so maybe for our audience who doesn't know you so well, do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, so I have been in and around the drinks world for a very long time. Started doing some very average bartending in some very average spaces when I was a lot younger, and then I guess properly got into it in around 2012 in a bar called Chez Regine, which was the forerunner to Whiskey and Almond. I was lucky to be a part of the founding crew there, and then from 2013-14 onwards, everything fairly well exploded with whiskey and other spirits for us as a bar, and then for me, I guess, as a spirits writer. Not long after that, I was asked to write the drinks column, or I guess the national drinks column for the Age and Sydney Morning Herald, which was a pretty big role at that point, which I don't think I fully understood when I agreed to it. But then everything exploded and got very serious very quickly, and Australian spirits culture, and I guess especially whiskey culture, was exploding. And not long after that, the first book that I was, commissioned to write, agreed to get together with the Hardy Grant folks, and we put together the Australian Spirits Guide, which came out in 2016, right at the initial coalescence of what becomes this big, massive movement of Australian distilling. So everything has just evolved from there through books and spirits judging and lots of other writing projects in between. So yeah, that's the progression.
And how did you land the gig with the Age? Were you writing about spirits elsewhere? Like, it's quite a big thing to take someone who's working behind a bar and go, hey, do our regular column?
Yes. So my background before that, I'd finished by that stage my Bachelor in Writing and Literature at the Uni of Melbourne, and was pretty aimlessly hunting around for some sort of career. I had started a Masters in Publishing. Books is, my passion. That's what I love. I love being in and around books. And so I was doing some writing for various publications then, some really dodgy poetry reviewing, literary.
Was the poetry dodgy, or was the reviewing dodgy?
No, the reviewing was dodgy.
Okay.
The poetry was good. Yeah, I can say that with certainty. And so, yes, I guess it became known to a number of people in and around the drink scene that I was doing some writing as well. And then some of the travel that I'd done, I put together some travel pieces. And I think it was actually Simon McGorham, who is a fan. He was the guy who was previously running that position for the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age. And I think he just got tired with the growth and the development of some of the bars and projects that he was working on. And he stepped down from the role, and then I guess I was the next cab off the rank. And it was a very funny meeting in Whiskey and Almond where Steve, the editor of Executive Style, came in, and asked me some silly questions. I still can't believe he actually gave it to me in the end, because if I think back on my answers now, not what you want to hear from a potential drinks journo, but yeah, thankfully we got on and got the column rolling, and then geez, it exploded from there, and everything became very serious very quickly. So.
And you've written a number of books since then as well.
Yep.
So it's not just been sort of short form stuff. There's been some pretty involved writing as well.
Yeah, I think with that study and background in publishing and literature, it was always my dream, my ultimate desire to get into book publishing. So when those, and bizarrely, so much of the stuff around all of this happens at Whiskey and Almond. One of the Hardy Grant editors, Rahana, she came in with her partner. They were looking for a bottle of whiskey, and we spent a good half an hour, way too long, dissecting which whiskey they should get. At the end of that, she was like, "Oh, do you write as well? Are you that guy?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then from there, she was just like, "Great, okay. Well, why don't you send me an email?" And that just started this ridiculous conversation with Hardy Grant that became the Australian Spirits Guide. So, and then following that, really digging into the history side of things with Forgotten Spirits, a publication we put out last year with Spirits Victoria, and a little bit before that, or sort of around about the same time, I was publishing with St Agnes Distillery on their 100-year anniversary, which is fantastic, and turned into a really amazing deep dive into Australian brandy culture and Australian wine culture, and looking at their enormous, significant 100 years of history. So, yeah.
And where did the interest in Australian spirits come in? Is that just because what you were seeing coming across the bar at Whiskey and Almond, or had you kind of, been interested in it before that?
I think the first time I had my first knockoff shift at Whiskey and Almond, Brooke Heyman said to me, "What do you want? So you can have any whiskey on the bar to knock off with." And I think it was a bit of a test as well. And so I got a little bit nervous, but then immediately, I'd only ever tried one Australian whiskey before I started at Whiskey and Almond, and this is 2012. And I decided to go for a Sullivan's Cove, a French Oak Sullivan's Cove. And that for me was a bit of a revelation, because my background in literature and publishing had always been thinking deeply about Australian literary culture, Australian writing. That was always one of my sort of main areas of interest. So to see that we had this nascent Australian distilling culture that no one was really paying much attention to, I thought, oh, this is great. I want to know everything I can about this. And that was right at this time where so many amazing distilleries in Tasmania in particular, in Victoria, South Australia and elsewhere, were just sort of starting to find their feet and starting to release some fantastic product. And it just all married up, quite seamlessly. It seems seamless, I guess, when I look back on it now. But from there, we really, as a bar and as a Melbourne bartending community as well, we were very keen on exploring and getting behind all of these distilleries and the people behind them, and trying to bring them to a newer audience. And with the column, it just became the thing that I was most fascinated by, where I was always keen on, exploring to and talking to local producers. And then a bar called Bad Frankie came along in 2014 as well. Seb Costello, founded this incredible, love letter to Australian distilling. And then really the movement was well and truly on then. And it became easier and easier for me to just go out and cover their stories and taste their amazing booze as well. So.
Yeah. And I guess, here we are now, 14 years on from your sort of first experience, or I guess serious experiences in the drinks world, launching the Full Measure, a publication covering and celebrating the world of Australian spirits. I guess a partnership between Crafty Pint team and yourself. I guess from your perspective, what was the appeal of getting on board with a project like this once I sort of first approached you? I know it's something that sort of Jules at Whiskey and Ale would have been saying to you, you need to speak to this James Smith guy, and saying to me, you need to speak to this Luke McCarthy guy. Yeah. But once that conversation happened, what was the appeal of getting on board with the project?
I think from an Australian drinks media point of view, it's always been pretty complicated in my time in the industry. I think, you obviously spent time in the glory days of print, and I sort of just came...
Tail end of the glory days of print.
Yeah, the tail end. I came in the very tail end of it, where it was, majority of everything I was doing was digital. So, yeah, definitely, I think whether it was, thinking about it from a publishing perspective, a bartending perspective with something like Bad Frankie, and then more broadly thinking about what sort of spaces are available to cover Australian spirits producers in any sort of depth. Mm-hmm. There hasn't been any. Yeah. And I think we've seen an evacuation from the majors in terms of covering spirits. There's really nowhere, now there's sort of no dedicated people or spaces available to cover the industry in any sort of depth. Mm-hmm. And my frustration is I suddenly found myself, after I left Whiskey and Element to concentrate more on writing and publishing, was that I was pretty much being asked by international publications to write about Australian spirits, which is great, and it's fantastic to hold those positions and to be able to broadcast the Australian spirits industry to the world like that. But we're still missing. I was just still missing out on all of the stuff that we could be publishing. There's 600 distilleries in Australia now, minimum, and the breadth and the depth and the quality across all of those distilleries, and just how much is sort of not being spoken about and not being written about with any sort of depth, was like a dagger in my heart, basically, as someone who is so interested in the industry. And so, Crafty Pint has been leading the beer coverage media side of things for such a long time here, and I've always loved the way you went about it. As a bartender, I read it religiously to make sure that I knew what the hell I was talking about behind the bar. But then seeing your coverage of the industry, especially as things exploded and got more difficult, the way that you've been able to work with people, tell their stories, and give people this great insight into what is a fantastic, amazing industry to be around. The opportunity to transfer that same level and depth over to the Australian spirits landscape appealed instantly, and it was a bit of a no-brainer when we started talking. So
yeah, I was kind of surprised when I first, I guess, started entertaining this idea maybe 2 or 3 years ago, going, there doesn't seem to be anything out there, and I couldn't quite believe it. And then when we spoke to yourself, you're like, no, you're right. There is. I mean, there's other publications out there, but nothing doing what we're planning to do, and like you say, telling all the stories and looking at the broader industry. And why do you think that is, that there has been that sort of a bit of a sort of donut hole in the middle of coverage of the industry?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, well, I guess for one, as we know, majority of the spirits industry is, well, in terms of Australian distillers, in terms of Australian-owned distilleries and spirits products, is very small. So majority of the market, the vast majority of spirits consumed, whether it's RTDs, you name it, is owned by foreign companies, which is not necessarily an enormous issue. And there's a lot of historical precedent to understand how we've got to that point. But it just means that there hasn't been, I think, the impetus there, probably because the finances are difficult. If you're dealing constantly with like 95%, mum and dad operations, small businesses that are, pretty much only have anywhere between 5 and 10 employees max. It's pretty difficult to sort of build an industry publication around what is an industry that's concentrated in small private hands. And so I think that's probably part of it. If we look overseas, if I look at sort of coverage of UK spirits, the American spirit scene as well, there's so much breadth and depth and size there that I guess industry publications, can manage to find their audience and find funding and keep it viable that way. So I think that's probably part of it. And the other probably reason is historical. Like as I've found out researching this, spirits have always maintained this complicated space in Australia. And if you look at our distilling laws in particular, so much of our excise and distilling laws have been developed around curtailing, I guess, the availability of spirits to Australian consumers. Not so much on the imported side of things though, as well. So like if you go all the way back to pre-World War II, Australia was the largest export market for Scotch whisky in the world. So we were consuming enormous quantities of Scotch whisky, and I guess the influence and the development of those industries there really didn't seem to be hampered in the way that what we see with Australian spirits producers and local spirits producers, where there's always been this prejudice, and it's been a colonial prejudice where Australian spirits have often been seen as inferior to anything coming out of Scotland, the UK, America. So that's a big part of it. I think some of it has been born out of Australian prejudice to local spirits products as well.
So it's just part of the appeal as well. You're going to help like celebrate and change people's opinions and perceptions on what's happening locally.
Absolutely. and that's key, fundamental. It always has been for me to get people to understand that, look, I love Scotch. I love Scottish whiskey. It's what I've sort of grown up in. It's what my uncles drank. It's what my grandfather drank. It's what their grandfathers and grandfathers would have drank. I can almost say that with certainty. So, but the chance that we have right now is to get behind people who are making something that is specific to this place where we live, and tastes of this place where we live too. And not only that, the people that make it are brilliant, fantastic, lovable, likable characters that just bring so much depth and color to everything they do. So, to have an opportunity to talk about all of those things and to cover it in the sort of depth that the Crafty Pint has been, applying to the Australian beer scene for many years now. What an opportunity.
Great. Let's take a break.
Calling all distilleries and spirit industry suppliers. At The Full Measure, we're aiming to build Australia's most comprehensive directory of distillers and the industry that supports them. Every listed distillery will benefit from product profiles, venue information, event promotion, and more. Not only is it a great avenue to connect with new customers, driving both online sales and cellar door footfall, you'll also be supporting The Full Measure as we create a new home for spirits journalism. Be part of the Full Measure directory. Reach out to Craig via craig@thefullmeasure.com.au for more information.
Welcome back. And Luke, for those who are unfamiliar with the world of Australian spirits or distilling, or maybe, know about names like Lark and nothing else, how would you sort of introduce Australian spirits to a potentially interested drinker?
It's broad. That is the starting point. It's multi-spirit as well. So that's sort of one of the key complexities to get your head around from the start. Unlike a lot of old world producers, say if we think about Scottish single malt, Scottish single malt distilleries predominantly produce just the one thing, and they have been doing that for same with cognac, same with American bourbon producers. They've got their style that's been established. Australian producers, and this is not just a recent phenomenon. This is actually a phenomenon that has been happening here for a long time, and there are reasons for that, which I'll get to. But the majority of just Australian distilleries produce different styles, for one. So a lot of our whiskey producers produce fantastic gin. So if you're keen on whiskey and a friend or your partner loves gin, then you're both sorted in that sense. And the quality aspect to that is remarkable as well. So we're not just talking; they don't just do these little offshoot side projects to fill time or to plug a gap. Oftentimes they're some of the best of their category and class as well. So that is super exciting. If you get around a certain distillery, then often you'll find that they produce something, hopefully, that will cover every flavour base that you could be after. And outside of that, we get to work with incredible local produce here, which is one of the reasons why we make fantastic rum, because we have incredible cane growing fields. We have incredible agriculturalists in that space, and again, that's been developing for a long time too. So if you love Australian wine, then I hope that you've come across Australian brandy. Once upon a time, Australian brandy was the dominant aged spirits category here in Australia. Some of the brandy that we produce here is easily some of the best in the world. So that is the initial complexity to get your head around. Oftentimes, what we get with Australian distilleries is lots of different spirits categories that they're inspired by and that they chase after, and then they do a really bloody good job of nailing. So that's the fun of it, for sure. We get all of this amazing produce that we can work into creating really fantastic spirits. That's a great place to start. Other than that, it's about trying to find, what do you like, and hopefully Australian distillers and producers will have a product that can fulfill that gap for you. Whether it's a really bold sort of juniper forward gin, whether it's a 20-30-year-old brandy, whether it's a peated, a heavily peated whiskey that you might be after, through to wild, wacky projects alongside that, sort of using native botanicals, using native ingredients to create something that, again, sort of speaks to this place. So, it's fun. It's often boundary pushing as well. So, it's not tied to one style or one idea, and which makes it fun. It's very dynamic. It's a very agile industry as well, which is, again, what makes it so good to go after.
And when you talk about being boundary pushing, is it fair to say that a lot of Australian producers don't feel so bound by rules and parameters? It's like, well, we're over here, other side of the world. We'll do what we want,
Yeah, that's it. So the rule side of things is probably something we'll explore on the Full Measure at some point. Rules, or the lack of rules, is a big side of the industry that a lot of people are talking about at the moment. So whether or not we get to a point where we've got more stringent regulations and requirements on what can be produced here and what should be produced here, that's something that's definitely going to come into focus over the next few years. But yeah, other than that, we're sort of not encumbered by very strict definitions and rules. If you go to Scotland and start making whiskey, then the Scotch Whisky Association is going to have a very deliberate say about exactly what you can and can't do, because that's what's been happening there for a very long time. Likewise, if you're producing American bourbon, one of the most stringently sort of styles that is very, very clear cut in terms of what it can and can't be. That's what you have to follow over there as well. Now, if you want to make a single malt in Australia, there's currently a lot of a debate about what that should look like and how it should taste, and where it should be distilled and where the wash can come from and all this sort of stuff. Likewise, if you're making a corn whiskey in Australia, you don't have to necessarily abide by the regulations that are thrown down in the States. So we've got a lot of flexibility here. Dave Vitale, someone we're going to speak to on the Full Measure, he likes to say that you can shoot a cannon through our rules, and that's pretty true. That's not to say that there aren't rules though, and they are very old. They're very long established, going back to 1901, 1906, when the Distillation Act and then the Spirits Act came into play. So there's a lot of heritage to talk about and discuss there, and some of those rules predate anything that you get really out of the UK. So there's a lot of fascination to be uncovered there, but it just means that in general we can be pretty free and fun in the way we go about it.
I noticed just there, and when I've heard you speak elsewhere as well, you're always very keen to, I guess, emphasise that Australia's distilling industry far predates the current explosion, the last sort of 20, 30 years. Why is it? Why do you think that's important?
Because, well, for one, those laws that we talked about. So, rum producers at the moment are having an interesting time trying to figure out how Australian rum moves forward, when all Australian rum, if you want to put rum on the title, has to be matured in a barrel for a minimum of 2 years. Now, that is pretty well anathema to how rum is produced anywhere else in the world. But it's a regulation that has meant our rum producers have had to adapt and I guess alter their stylistic preferences and even their production to make sure that we meet that quality standard. What that means for flavour and distillation technique and how you go about it, that's all critical and crucial there. But beyond that, I mean, in terms of thinking about Australian spirits more generally, their global opportunity, I mean, we were global players once before in the early 1900s. We were one of the fourth, fifth largest whiskey producer in the world. So the opportunity from my perspective, in terms of understanding this history, is it guides where we're going. If we want to continue to be a global operator in the spirits industry and grow our presence in that space, we have precedent that we can look back on. And likewise, to see how various distillers, especially in the brandy space, especially in the whiskey space, went about it in former eras, to see how they were able to create really high quality matured products. The fact that we did it before, we can absolutely do it again, and obviously we are doing it now. There's so much history that we can lean on in terms of what it is to be an Australian distiller and produce Australian spirits, and then what it is to get Australian consumers involved in that as well. Because in former eras, 40-50% of whiskey consumed in certain sections and certain periods of history was Australian. So the fact that we could potentially get back there in the next 5 to 10, 20 years is super exciting. For some, it seems like a huge mountain to climb, but the history tells you that we have climbed it before, and I think we can do it again. So
we've touched on styles as being a sort of big hot topic, one that we'll probably cover countless times on the Full Measure, growth of sort of local and export potential. What are some other big issues in the spirits world that you'd love to, you think aren't getting coverage and you'd love to sort of touch on?
Well, some of the issues are getting coverage, that's for sure, that I think we're going to be touching on. Certainly what's happening in the illicit spirits game at the moment is really complicated and really tricky. Some of that relates to government regulation and excise. It is something that I guess we'll try and look at. It won't be something that we want to give too much space to, because obviously we want to report on licit distillers, not illicit ones. We
don't want to get firebombed either.
Preferably no firebombing of the office would be handy. There's that side to it as well. But I mean, other big issues, obviously the regulatory side of things, how we move forward on that. Australia's global opportunity as a spirits exporter, I think, is something that will be absolutely fascinating to watch. We have some distilleries in that space at the moment, and that's just going to continue to grow. And I know there's appetite for Australian spirits overseas as well. If you look at what's happening in parts of Asia, even in the US and the UK, there's definitely a lot of interest in what we're doing here. So that's going to be a fascinating thing to watch moving forward. And then I guess one of the other, really significant things is how our spirits products are going to continue to match up against, the best from around the world. I think we're already at that level at the moment. So how we can tell that story and convince people both in Australia and overseas that what we're producing here is, as good as it gets, and how we can really sort of leverage that and promote that story to an Australian and a global audience, for me, is like, it will be one of the big things moving forward.
And what about we talked about some issues and some challenges faced by the industry there in terms of where the industry is now? What do you see as its key strengths?
Key strength is quality, for sure. Yeah. That has just been something that's come through loud and proud over the last sort of 10 years, ever since Sullivan's Cove won World's Best Single Malt in 2014. That was a pretty good quality argument. Mm-hmm. No one outside of Japan or Scotland had previously taken out that accolade, and it showed everyone that, a style that's difficult to, absolutely nail and compete when you've got, distilleries from around the world that have decades and decades of mature stock sitting in warehouses, ready to be put in a bottle. The fact that a little upstart from Tassie can compete with them and then beat them is pretty staggering. And then, 2-3 years before that, West Wind's won double gold at San Francisco. I mean, the awards have just piled up since. So hopefully Australians are now aware of the fact that we're producing some of the best spirits in the world right here. And then what happens from there is, well, how can we continue to sort of convince people that the flavors and the uniqueness of, our local products, our native botanicals, our woods as well. How do we put sort of native flavors into spirits products? It's something that probably you don't see as much of, certainly in wine. I know some fantastic brewers have explored that space over the last decade, but that to me is what really stands out, especially when I'm overseas talking to other distillers, writers, other spirits producers, consumers. When they get a taste of that, unique Australian flavour that can only come from here, they're instantly transported and they're instantly transfixed by what our distillers are capable of doing. So that to me is a really fantastic strength that will become more and more apparent over the next 5 to 10 years, just how unique Australian spirits can taste. And hopefully we'll get people both in Australia and internationally get behind that.
And I guess aside from how the liquid is looking and tasting, like in terms of the Australian industry, how does that, if we go back to that sort of newcomer to the industry and you're trying to describe it to them, is there a vibrant cellar door culture? Is there a vibrant bar culture, celebrating this industry as well? Yeah,
so the cellar door stuff is incredible where, look, I'd say the vast majority of Australian distilleries have their own cellar door operations. At least 50% of distilleries in Australia are based regionally as well. So there's an incredible story to tell there around getting people out into the regions, but then for people who are in the regions to get them to support their local producers and to really get behind them, because that to me is absolutely one of the best sides of the story. Certainly early days, Whiskey and Almond, my early days covering the industry, it was all about getting to these locations and getting to these distilleries, meeting the people, and then covering what they were up to from there, and hopefully getting people really excited to do the same, to get out to the distilleries and visit them, because that's, I think, always been one of the big missing pieces in Australia. We're so bloody far away from, and it's not easy to pop over to a distillery in Scotland and see what they're doing. So to have that same level of knowledge and complexity right here on our doorstep, and to see how our local distillers are adapting those styles and those ideas to Australian conditions is really fantastic. So certainly that's something we're definitely going to be doing, popping into a lot of cellar doors and distilleries and talking to and meeting the people behind them.
We've got our work cut out.
Yeah. Big country.
And 5 years on, hopefully we're all still here doing this.
Yeah.
What do you sort of hope to have achieved in those 5 years, or what do you think, like something you'd really like to hang your hat on the first few years of the full measure? James, I'm going to make you answer that as well afterwards.
Oh, great. Okay. Look, getting in there and helping and supporting as many distilleries as possible, for one. So having a space where they can share their stories, promote what they're doing, for one, and then also having a space where we can do the same for them. So building that home base where they feel comfortable, supported, challenged at times as well, because we're definitely going to be doing that. and yeah, fingers crossed, become an industry partner that people can get behind. And then, more than anything, I suppose, like getting into the heads of consumers and convincing them that this amazing industry is worth getting behind, is worth getting excited about. And, you know, the next time they're in the bottle shop or the bar, that it's not complex or difficult or confusing for them to jump straight behind an Australian product. That to me is one of the ultimate goals. If we can be in that space and make consumers aware of the fact that we have this incredible industry here that we need to get behind and support. If in 5 years' time we're telling that story and we're well advanced and we've got people even more engaged with Australian spirits, then that would be the dream, I guess, in a few years' time.
James, what's your dream?
Yeah, well, I think echoing one of the things that Luke said there, I think when I started the Crafty Pint, the idea was, you know, there was no one covering the Australian craft beer scene, and it was more about doing that and putting some stories out there. And it wasn't my intention for it to become like this industry hub, but it kind of did. It became this central point where whether you were a consumer or a retailer or a brewer, you had this sort of hub bringing things together. So it'd be great to create something like that, I think, for the Full Measure. But, you know, what I've realised over time is I love telling stories. I'm a storyteller more than anything else. And yes, we've addressed all manner of issues. We've created campaigns over the years to try and sort of help support the beer industry. I'd like to think if there's a need to do that in the spirits world, we can do that as well. But really, you know, just celebrating the amazing stories that are out there. As it goes without saying, it's been a tough few years for anyone in you know, booze production or booze retail. But, you know, especially since we started doing the Crafty Pint podcast, you know, it reminds you of how many amazing people are out there doing incredible things, how much innovation there is. And I think, you know, if there has been that sort of dearth of coverage of what's happening in that space within the spirits industry, it'd be great to be able to look back in a few years' time and go, we started to, I guess, create that picture, almost like document it. I'd love to think, something I've thought for a number of years with the Crafty Pint is hopefully in years to come or decades to come, people can look back and go, yes, it might be sort of created in this sort of sprawling, organically growing website, but here is the story of Australian craft beer, you know, told in a sort of over however many decades the Crafty Pint goes on for, but to create something similar for the, you know, with the Full Measure as well, and actually do justice to an industry that perhaps hasn't been covered or celebrated in the way that it perhaps deserves.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Wonderful. Let's leave it there.
Fantastic. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
The Full Measure podcast is produced and edited by Matt Hoffman. For all partnership inquiries, reach out to Craig Williams, craig@thefullmeasure.com.au. To keep up to date with everything happening in Australian spirits, visit thefullmeasure.com.au and subscribe.